koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei. July 31st, mark it on your calendar. New Zealand's border opens for real. Cruise ships, students, migrants, it's all on. And today the government unveiled its great immigration reset. About 85 highly skilled, highly paid occupations, vets, surgeons and doctors go straight to the front of the residency queue. But what about nurses and teachers? The checkout wars are on. The second of the big supermarket chains returns fire, cutting prices on everyday items. Watchdogs and government agencies circle Gloriavale after a landmark court decision. And crossing Auckland's harbour on a high wire, could a gondola beat a second bridge?
RNZ News at 5. Ahi Marie, I'm Evie Ashton. The international border will be fully open 2 months earlier than planned, from July the 31st, and businesses say it's been a long time coming. Visitors and international students will be able to apply for visas from then, and cruise ships can return. Business New Zealand's Catherine Beard says almost every sector is struggling with a shortage of workers.
We really need to get people back in here and let them know that New Zealand's open for business. So I think that'll be very welcome. Some of our regions and sectors have been doing it really tough. They've been missing the international students, they've been missing the tourists. We really need to get all that business back and happening.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern also made a number of other immigration announcements today, including sector-specific agreements to support a shift away from low-skilled migrant labour and a new green list of 85 hard-to-fill high-skill roles that provides a priority pathway to residency. The Commerce Minister, David Clark, has described Foodstuffs' discount drive as a nice gesture, but says more reform is needed. The supermarket giant says it will reduce the prices of more than 110 items to 2021 levels, down an average 10%. It comes after Countdown announced a temporary price freeze on 500 items over winter. David Clark says he's focused on fixing longer-term structural issues in the sector, but the action is welcome.
These things have all happened since we launched this market study. Supermarkets, I think, know that they are under the spotlight, and it is good to see some progress.
The government is expected to announce its supermarket reforms later this month. The PR company representing celebrity chef Nadia Lim says the apology made by businessman Simon Henry adds further insult to injury. Deborah Peed says Ms Lim received an emailed apology yesterday evening after the chief executive of chemical company DGL made derogatory comments on her appearance 6 days earlier. Leah Tibbett reports.
The two-line letter states Mr Henry had unsuccessfully called Miss Lim several times to apologise. He therefore hoped she would accept the letter as his sincere and formal apology for his inappropriate language. Miss Peed says, in her opinion, one had to wonder why he even bothered. She says Miss Lim's phone records will confirm she has not received or missed a call from him and will not act on the offer to call him. The comments have been broadly criticised, and investment managers Kiwi Wealth and Simplicity blacklisted DGL from their funds.
The workplace safety regulator will visit the Gloriavale Christian community as a result of an employment court ruling on child labour. The court yesterday found 3 former members were employees from the age of 6, and that ready access to child labour was a significant factor in the success of Gloriavale's business model. The Workplace Minister, Michael Wood, says WorkSafe will visit Gloriavale soon. He says staff will examine whether workplace standards are being adhered to. The charities regulator has also opened an investigation into Gloriavale's Christian Church Community Trust as a result of the court's judgment. Stewart Island residents are disappointed the local council is pushing ahead with increases to the island's visitor levy. The $5 levy has been in place since 2013 with aims to ease the burden of tourism on the community. Today, the Southland District Council voted to increase the levy to $10 in October 2023, with the levy increasing to $15 in October 2025. It's expected to be formally rubber-stamped next month. Ulva Goodwillie from Ulva's Guided Walks is unimpressed.
I think the suggested timing for these increases is ill-advised. It's impolitic. at this time. I think it's a very bad timing on their part with the cost of living.
Ulva Goodwillie says residents don't want the $15 fee. To sport, and former New Zealand cricket captain Brendan McCullum has emerged as a contender to be England's Test coach. McCullum, who's currently in charge of the Indian Premier League side Kolkata Knight Riders, that's better, has held talks with England cricket officials. England are looking for separate Test and limited overs coaches. McCullum was initially seen as a better fit for the white ball role, but he's now in the frame for the Test job. Meanwhile, Black Caps batsman Henry Nicholls will leave with the New Zealand side this weekend for their Test series in England, despite suffering a calf injury at training yesterday, although he may still not be fit in time for the first Test. Crusaders coach and former All Black Scott Robertson says a Nations Championship involving the top teams from the Northern and Southern Hemispheres is essential. World rugby bosses are meeting in Dublin to discuss setting up a competition from 2026. The top division would reportedly involve the Six Nations teams in the north and the Rugby Championship teams in the south, along with Japan and Fiji.
If every sort of test match has got purpose and it's leading to an outcome, it just makes sense, doesn't it? And then it means we can align World Club champs in there as well. So for me, let's do it.
And the PGA Tour has rejected requests from players who'd hoped to play the first Saudi-backed LIV Golf Invitational Series event in London next month. Phil Mickelson, Sergio Garcia and Lee Westwood are among those who requested a release. That's the news.
Challenging the newsmakers.
Again, Susie, we're just not going to get into that conversation, and I'm really sorry about that. I'm not meaning to be rude. I'm just saying to you, my head is not in that space.
Asking the tough questions.
Come on, Corin, we're at a different stage now. He needs to be challenged. This is disgraceful stuff going on from this bloke.
And seeing the lighter side.
Good morning, Corin. Sorry, I'm sweating after that interview about exams.
You'll be rest assured it won't be that tough. Keeping it real. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. Fine weather for Northland, Waitomo, from Northland to Waitomo, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taumarunui and Taupo. Partly cloudy from Taranaki to Wellington, including Taihape and Wairarapa, becoming fine apart from Wairarapa tomorrow. For Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers in Gisborne and northern Hawke's Bay, but areas of cloud elsewhere. Nelson, Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, mostly fine. However, there's a chance of a shower about Bulla and northwest Nelson today, also for the far south of Fiordland. Fine weather for Marlborough and Canterbury. Otago and Southland fine, but cloud is developing this evening, becoming mainly fine tomorrow afternoon. And for Riekohu, the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with the odd shower. It's 7 minutes past 5. I'll have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint e tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Hello world and would-be New Zealanders. The border will fully open on July 31st, 2 months earlier than signalled. The date was revealed as part of the government's immigration reset that's aimed at building a high-skill, high-wage economy. It's created a green list of about 85 sought-after occupations, including cardio and neurosurgeons, environmental and geotech engineers, vets and GPs. They can enter New Zealand on a work visa and basically apply for residency straight away. Jobs on a second-tier list, nurses, teachers and midwives, are also highly desirable, but they will have to wait 2 years before going down the residency path. Employers wanting to bring workers in on temporary visas must apply for accreditation, pass a good character test and pay the median hourly wage of $27.76. But the struggling hospitality and tourism sectors get a temporary exemption with a lower wage threshold till April next year. Immigration Minister Chris Farfoy is confident his department's ready for the rush.
We've hired about 230 more staff in order to help with processing. We've got a new back office system, which means that when people are applying, it won't be as paper-based as it has been in the past. In fact, it will be all online. That will help us with the user experience, but also help us manage the workflows behind the scenes to ensure all the likes of visitor visas, work visas, student visas, and importantly, making sure that we can get the resident visas that have been applied for done in a timely manner.
So will going online enhance the experience? Because one other time you did that, the system just crashed.
Well, I acknowledge that, Lisa, but I think one of the frustrations that people have had when they have been applying for visas in the past, because it's a paper-based system, is being able to know where the application is at. When we move to the online system, they'll have their own login. They'll be able to track where their application is in the process. So that means they won't also have to ring the 0800 number to figure out where things are at with their application.
So employers are going to have to get themselves accredited in order to bring in workers on temporary work visas. What's the criteria for accreditation?
Well, they have to be going a concern, obviously being able to pay their staff, but more importantly for the vigilance of the system, we're going to make sure that those who have erred in terms of immigration law, who may have a background of work exploitation, that they're fit and proper employers.
So will there be a good character test in essence?
Yeah, in essence, we want to make sure that we're not giving the ability for employers who have exploited workers in the past the ability to continue to bring workers in.
So this median wage threshold, it's almost $28 an hour, right? But you're giving hospitality and tourism a grace period where they get to pay less until April of next year, I think it is. Why are you letting them off the hook?
Oh, we're not letting them off the hook. We're recognising that they've obviously had a very difficult 2 years in terms of being able to maintain their businesses. Traditionally, about 40% of their workforce has also been the likes of working holiday visas and students, which we haven't been able to attract back in big numbers to the country yet. That grace period will obviously allow them to continue to hire people at that lower level, but also give the opportunity to build up some capacity for the likes of partnership visas, working holiday visas, to make sure that they can have the staff to be able to run their operations in the way that they would usually do. Obviously, our preference is that we can test the local market and train New Zealanders to be able to do some of those jobs, which is a longer conversation that we're going to have with that sector and a number of other sectors.
Minister, where are those locals that they can employ and upskill? Because we've got, 3.2% unemployment. A lot of the people that want jobs have them, and then there's difficulty getting workers into shift work. So where are they supposed to get these workers from in the local market for these jobs?
Well, 3.2 is not zero, and also we understand that there are a lot of people out there who are on part-time work who would like to do more hours, so there is some spare capacity in the system. We're wanting to make sure we can help the likes of the hospitality sector and tourism transition. That's why we recognise that with the ability for them to pay $25 an hour until April of next year. But we also want to make sure that they're doing their best to attract workers and train workers.
So the green list, right? This is the people we need most, the occupations that we need most, and they can apply straight away for residency. Some of the things on the list, engineers, quantity surveyors, vets, oncologists, surgeons, straight to residency applications. But why are nurses and lab technicians and teachers not as valuable to you? Why do they have to wait 2 years?
Well, actually, that's because of feedback from the sectors themselves.
I thought we were crying out for nurses, Minister.
We are, and that's why we're giving them a streamlined pathway. The other thing is that as soon as someone gets residency, they have open work rights, which means they can work wherever they like. One of the issues that we're going to have with the likes of nurses, and certainly something that has come through the sector, is that when they arrive, they want to make sure they retain them in their jobs and in their employment for a decent amount of time. 2 years, we think, is the period that they should be able to work in that with a commitment to residency. That is feedback direct from the sectors themselves that we're bringing in the workers.
So it's a way of bonding them to a single employer for a period of time.
To a degree, because absolutely, if we're going to bring nurses in and we get them residency straight away, they can go and work wherever they want. We want to make sure that if we're going to bring particular skills in, that they're meeting a particular skill gap, and obviously nurses is a particular skill gap that we have at the moment.
Yeah, but even if they move to another employer, we still need nurses, and it would still be an extra nurse in the country doing a nurse's job.
Yes, but also that's a massive disruption for employers if they can only retain someone for 8 months. We want to make sure, and that's good that they do stay in the system, and making sure that that sector has the ability to retain nurses is important.
So what is the pathway to residency for workers who are not on that green list?
So there are a number. You can either earn 2 times the median wage, in which case you'll have a 2-year path to residence, and then the other way is the more traditional way, through the skilled migrant category. That's been closed for some time since we've closed the border.
When is that opening up again, the skilled migrant category?
So we hope to do that soon after the application window for the RV, resident visa, closes. That closes in July, so we would hope September-ish.
So this reset, how many extra people is it going to bring into the country?
Well, that's hard to tell with the flow of migrants at the moment.
You must have done some projections, Minister. So previously, net migration prior to COVID, about 50 to 70,000 people a year. What do you think the changes will mean in terms of that overall number?
These are just forecasts. My understanding is that we expect over the next 12 months about 28,000 people to be eligible for an accredited employer work visa. How many of those will be in the occupations on the green list, obviously, is anyone's guess.
Green Party says you're just entrenching discrimination against low-wage migrants. Your response to that?
Well, I completely disagree. There's obviously the ability for those sectors to continue to employ people who are below the median wage, and we want to make sure that we're giving Kiwis the opportunity to get...
So they can work here and pick our apples and keep our fruit industry running during COVID, but we don't want them to live here permanently or be residents.
What I would also say to that is we've acknowledged the contribution that they've made to the country by giving a lot of those people residency so they can stay here in New Zealand as well. We've made no secrets in terms of our immigration system, but we want to make sure that we're moving to a higher wage, higher skills immigration system, making sure that businesses get the skills they need, and that's what we've done today.
And that's Immigration Minister Chris Whawhoi. Homai o whakaaro, would love your feedback on this one. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. The green list, have they got the occupations right? And nurses, teachers, lab technicians, second tier, they don't get to apply for residency straight away. Is it going to work? Text me, pātui mai, 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The checkout war is on. Supermarket chain Foodstuffs has launched a price drop on selected grocery items just days after its main competitor froze prices on more than 500 so-called essential items. From next Monday, Foodstuffs, which operates the New World, Pack and Save and Foursquare brands, is cutting the prices of more than 110 of the most shopped items. The grocery giant says on average it's a 10% saving across the basket of goods. Well, joining us now is Foodstuffs North Island boss Chris Quinn. Kia ora, Chris.
Kia ora, Lisa.
Why are you doing this now?
Look, we've been working on value all year. We reckon that, our customers are facing inflationary impact right across the board. We've been working on what we could do. We've been able in the last 2 or 3 weeks to really focus on the products that customers buy most often, that go into most family shops, and look at the promise of taking them back to where they were a year ago. That, we think, will save customers about $500,000 a week, and it's about 1.3 million units of those products. So these really are the products that people buy. There are butter and cheese and tea, coffee, sugar, flour, and some fresh items, onions, carrots, apples, potatoes, all those sort of things that are actually real and everyday shop and part of how people are trying to make household budgets work.
$500,000 worth of savings a week. It sounds like a lot until you look at the figure from the Commerce Commission, which says you're making more than $1 million in excess profits a day. Can't you do more?
When you look at the Commerce Commission report in total, they actually do quite a extensive piece of work comparing the return on capital in the supermarket industry in New Zealand to every market in the world and the ones that are really competitive and really big populations. And we sit within about a 1% return on the capital difference. The other thing.
So you're comfortable with the $430 million in excess profits a year, according to the Commerce Commission?
We don't make excessive profits.
Okay.
That is a number based on a cost of capital. The other number that is in there and accepted by the Commission is that out of every dollar of retail, we essentially keep 19 cents and 4 cents of that flows to profit. The rest is tax and our suppliers.
So I'm just wondering, are you doing this now because you feel for your customers, or are you a little bit frightened that regulation is coming, given the Minister's comments?
Look, we've got stores owned in every community. Every one of our stores is owned by a local family who own the store and operate it. They know what their customers are telling them in those communities. The last 2.5, 3 weeks of getting this together has been driven by the fact that we can see that inflation is a real challenge for New Zealanders. And we wanted, as an industry, as a cooperative, to get on the front foot and see what we could do that would actually help with the grocery bill next week.
You've said in your press statement it's not a marketing stunt. What would make you say that? Do you think some others are engaging in marketing stunts?
Look, I think we're just trying to be clear that we are lowering prices from next week on the key items that New Zealanders buy a lot of each week and that it's real.
So the selection of the items, how did you choose them?
We've got a lot of data and insight about customers. We've been working on this for the last couple of years, so we're able to go to the items that pretty much go in every trolley and target those items. So, it's why it is the block of cheese, it's why it's potatoes, it's why it's those products, because nappies, all sorts of things that people are buying all the time and need, basically, to support their families.
So are they just cheaper than you would usually sell them for, or are they cheap compared to other outlets selling them? Because there's a big difference, isn't there?
Look, essentially what we targeted was getting them back to the price they were a year ago. That is about a 10% saving on average across these 110 items. Whether that's going to be cheaper than other offers in the market, look, it's a competitive market. We'll see what happens, but this is us putting our foot in and doing what we think is the right thing for our customers at our cost. So this is funded by the members and owners of our cooperative, not funded by suppliers or anyone else.
Yeah, okay.
Us stepping forward.
Yeah, Chris, can you just give us a bit more detail on that then? So who's taking the hit? If it's 10% saving across the board, that means you need to take 10% out of the system, right? Whose pocket exactly is it coming out of?
That's coming out of the owners of our stores, who also own our cooperative, our shareholders.
So 10% less profit to them?
It is a 10% saving on this basket of goods. It's not 10% of total less profit.
Right, of course.
We're not talking to the profit number, but just to be clear, this is a multi-million-dollar investment.
How long is it going to last for?
So we've set this commitment out for 3 months, 13 weeks, goes to the 14th of August, and then as soon as we get it on shelf on Monday and get the tickets up so that customers can see easily where the products are and what products have got the price rollback in place, then we're going to start working on what we do at the end of the 13 weeks. Inflation is moving fast, and we've got to try and really roll our sleeves up and be as smart as we can for our customers to get value for the rest of the year.
Chris, how much of this is down to bad publicity and people really angry at you and other supermarket chains over the prices?
Look, I think there's a lot of tension in New Zealand communities right now about inflation on all fronts: fuel, electricity, food, everything. We're just focused on the bit we can do and making a meaningful difference by lowering these prices.
But you could have done this at any time in the past few weeks, in the past years, in fact.
Well, we've been working on value all of the time. So Pack and Save is New Zealand's lowest food prices, always has been and is fighting hard to stay so. And many other programs of promotions, for example, all the way through the COVID 2 years, we never dropped the volume of specials and promotions to look after customers. So this is another initiative in a chain of things that is about value for our customers.
Thanks for talking us through that. That is Chris Quinn, who is Foodstuffs North Island boss. It is 22 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. WorkSafe will soon come knocking on Gloriavale's door, and the charities regulator has launched an investigation as a result of an employment court ruling on child labour. Government agencies are under pressure to act after the court found children as young as 6 were employees at the isolated Christian community. Young people put to work as children have described the judgment as a turning point in their employment fight that could result in big compensation payouts. Jean Edwards reports.
Levi Courage is on the road to Gloriavale to see his parents and 8 siblings who remain with the secretive West Coast sect. This time he's bringing news of a breakthrough employment court win.
I'd actually planned a few weeks ago to see my family today, but yeah, the judge ruled yesterday, so I guess it's more of a victory trip now.
Mr Courage is one of 3 young men the court found were employees from the age of 6, doing difficult and sometimes dangerous farm and factory work. Going back isn't easy.
I've been back a few times, but every time it's really triggering going back and seeing all those people that are feeding you, and it's quite hurtful when you go there and your own family won't say hello to you because you're not allowed to, you know.
The court's chief judge found that ready access to child labour was a significant factor in the success of Gloriavale's business model. Children worked long hours, sometimes up to 70 hours a week, and were hit, denied food or publicly shamed if they didn't work hard or fast enough. The Workplace Minister, Michael Wood, says WorkSafe inspectors will pay Gloriavale a visit.
WorkSafe, who have been very engaged and have issued 10 improvement notices over the last year and a half or so, will be conducting a visit to the site again in the short term in response to the ruling to ensure that workplace standards are being applied where they should be.
Mr Wood has met officials from government agencies to analyse the implications of the ruling, which he says changes the legal landscape. The Labour Inspectorate twice found Gloriavale members were volunteers. Mr Wood insists there hasn't been a lack of interest from agencies over the last couple of years.
Part of the challenge that agencies have had to date is that there has not been legal clarity about the employment status of these people, and that has to some degree constricted the ability of agencies like the Labour Inspectorate to take enforcement action.
Father of 10, Isaac Pilgrim, left Gloriavale 4 years ago and has cautioned against government agencies rushing in without understanding the community's mindset.
There'll be a lot of parents scared that their kids are going to get taken off them and that. And it's a situation that's going to need to be handled carefully.
The judge reserved her decision on the costs the men are entitled to, and it's not clear how wage arrears or compensation might be calculated. But Levi Courage says people deserve recompense for messed up childhoods.
Really, I just like them to be paid for what they've had to go through. Gloriavale should be forking it over willingly, but they're not because they don't believe they're entitled to it.
The charities regulator has also opened an investigation into Gloriavale's Christian Church Community Trust as a result of the court's judgment.
And joining us now is Mike Stone, who's the General Manager of Charity Services, which comes under Internal Affairs. Tēnā koe.
Kia ora, Lisa.
What is the scope of your investigation into Gloriavale?
I think it's too early to say, Lisa. So, naturally we have concerns about the employment court's findings and we want to take time to carefully consider those findings, but we haven't determined the scope to date.
In terms of your jurisdiction and what you look at, what in that judgment is cause for concern for you guys specifically?
Well, look, the judgment doesn't make a finding on serious wrongdoing under the Charities Act. That falls within our mandate. So the four broad types of serious wrongdoing defined under the Act are what we're going to be looking at and making an assessment initially of what's in the finding as it applies to serious wrongdoing.
So you're referring there to, Mike, the fact that if you are a registered charity, you must not engage in conduct that constitutes serious wrongdoing, right?
Yes, that's right.
Can you just explain to us, in the simplest of terms, what might be considered serious wrongdoing?
So broadly, it could be something like the corrupt or the unlawful use of some funds or resources by the entity. It could be something that constitutes a serious risk to public interest. It could be something that is an offence, that constitutes an offence, or it could be something that is a course of conduct that's overtly oppressive or discriminatory or grossly negligent, something within that area.
So beating children for not working fast enough or hard enough, withholding food if they don't work, and not paying workers, does that meet the criteria that you've just laid out for wrongdoing?
I think that is deeply concerning, and we're all deeply concerned about what that employment court judgment has delivered, and consequently that's the reason why we've decided to open an investigation, certainly.
So what form does that investigation take? Do you go to Gloriavale? Do you do interviews? How does it work?
Look, there are many different ways that we can choose to get the information we need to conduct that investigation. But it's too early to say. As I reflect back to what I said earlier, the judgment only came out yesterday. We've made the decision today based on our initial assessment to conduct that investigation. But how we will go about that and what information we'll seek will still be to determine.
But in saying that, the judgment and the judge has determined a certain set of facts, right? So doesn't that make your job more straightforward?
It certainly made our assessment of whether we would feel the need to look at the information in that judgment and what it means against serious wrongdoing easier. We've made that assessment and we've decided that, in fact, yes, we need to investigate.
One of the things in the judgment was a comment from the Chief Employment Court judge, who basically said that the commercial success of Gloriavale was built on child labour, right? Just would like you to explain something to our listeners. Having commercial interests, how does that play into being a charity? They're not mutually exclusive, are they?
No, so there is case law that's confirmed that charities and registered charities can use business activities to fundraise ultimately for their charitable purpose. They can carry out those general business activities, but as long as those funds are ultimately applied to the charitable purpose.
So will you be considering whether the considerable assets of Gloriavale, financial assets, are being used for the correct financial purposes, charitable work?
We haven't determined whether that will fall within the scope of the investigation at this stage.
So how long do you reckon this review is going to take?
Look, again, it would be lovely for everybody affected to have a time frame, but these things are complex. There are multiple things to consider, and it would be unfair to everybody involved to put a time frame on it at this stage.
What are the benefits of being a registered charity? I mean, what does an organisation like Gloriavale stand to lose if they are deregistered?
So there are some tax benefits and donee status benefits. So if any registered charity was to be deregistered from a decision by the Independent Charities Registration Board, they would lose that donee status and they would lose those tax benefits. So for the listeners out there, that could mean that there would be financial implications for that entity moving forward. It would be unfair or inappropriate for me to comment on what they might be moving forward.
In saying that, though, the judge in that ruling lays out some of the assets of Gloriavale, and they're substantial. So tax benefits could run into the millions, couldn't they?
Again, I'm not in a position to comment on that.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Mike Stone, who's the General Manager of Charity Services. E te iwi e haere e a checkpoint. Allegations the government's immigration reset is actually a white immigration policy. We talked to a leading lawyer. And the Wagatha Christie scandal, footballers' wives, allegations of tabloid leaks and an Instagram sting. Oh, I can't wait. Homai o whakaaro. Do send us your feedback on anything you've heard in the program this evening. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to get to the headlines now. Ane a iwi mina pita pita kōrero.
The border will be fully opened 2 months earlier than planned from July the 31st. Visitors and international students will be able to apply for visas from then, and cruise ships can return. Business New Zealand's Catherine Beard says almost every sector is struggling with a shortage of workers. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern also announced sector-specific agreements to support a shift away from low-skilled migrant labour and a new green list of 85 hard-to-fill high-skill roles that provides a priority pathway to residency. Foodstuffs says it will reduce the prices of more than 110 items to 2021 levels, down an average 10%. The Commerce Minister says the discount drive is a nice gesture, but says more reform is needed. The government's expected to announce supermarket reforms later this month. Another 28 deaths related to COVID-19 have been reported today, along with 7,970 new community cases. The UK's National Meteorological Office is warning the likelihood of crossing a key global warming threshold has risen significantly. It says there's now a 50-50 chance the world will warm by more than 1.5 degrees over the next 5 years. The office says it's almost certain this year will be one of the warmest on record. The workplace safety regulator will visit the Gloriavale Christian community as a result of an employment court ruling on child labour. The court yesterday found 3 former members were employees from the age of 6 and that ready access to child labour was a significant factor in the success of Gloriavale's business model. And Stewart Island residents are disappointed the local council is pushing ahead with increases to the island's visitor levy. The Southland District Council voted to increase the levy to $10 in October 2023 and to $15 by October 2025. The levy aims to ease the burden of tourism on the community, but Ulva Goodwillie from Ulva's Guided Walks says residents don't want the $15 fee. Those are the headlines. Our next news bulletin is at 6.
Kia ora rā e ho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei, and it's time for the business news. Ko taku hoa inai nei, ko Nona Peltier. Nona, push pay. Well, interesting conversation because that's how a lot of churches get their charity donations. And its profits are up and up in the United States?
They are up. So most of the money that the PushPay makes is in the United States, about 98% of their income, in fact. So their profit rose 7%, and that was for the year. But the problem with that result is that the market didn't like it very much because the outlook isn't what they were hoping for. So although they made $53.1 million and revenue up 12%, the share price actually dropped 2.3%. And one of the reasons was because the margins are the same for this year as that's the outlook. It's not really going to make any difference much. Their financial year is going to be lower than the year earlier, and that's because they're going to spend more money on marketing and hiring staff to fund their expansion. And there's no update on what offers they may be entertaining, because we talked about that a little while ago, how Pushpay had received some unsolicited offers, but they didn't discuss what has happened with those. So that left the market hanging a little bit, and so dropped 2.3%.
Okay, let's talk about Auckland Airport. It's investing for the future as the airport begins welcoming back international visitors. I'm sure they're clapping their hands at the border announcement today. So what's it up to? Oh, yeah. So I spoke with their chief executive, Kari Hurihanga Nui, and she's been in the job just a short while. But she said it was really exciting to see the people back. It's really lifted the morale of staff. The company is going to spend $300 million on a new baggage handling and transport hub ahead of the integration of the domestic and international terminals. That's $1 billion plus investment that they're going to be making there. That's in addition to that $300 million that they're going to spend. Well, from June, they're going to begin that work. But, the second runway. So there's a lot of other things that they have to do in advance of trying to develop that airport. Some things have been put on hold. And the chief executive says really the priority now is to get the business back up to full speed.
Operationally, we're growing back into increased capacity. So we are seeing more stores starting to open as far as retailers and tenants coming back. And as we're seeing passenger numbers picking up, is matching our recovery alongside that and working really closely with the likes of border agencies to ensure that we can provide a good experience for travellers.
Yeah, so the airport is still planning to build that second runway that they've been talking about for 2030. Whether or not that actually happens by 2030, that remains to be seen. It's going to depend on how well the aviation industry recovers, as well as population growth. So those two things are up in the air, literally, and we won't know about the second runway for now. She's not actually committing to anything there.
Okay. What about market numbers, Nona?
Yes, well, the market was surprisingly a lot better today than it has been. So instead of a lot of losses that we've been talking about this week, we rose 4 points. So that's quite good, to 11,233, and that's better than what we've been seeing in Asia. They edged higher as well, but there's still a lot of worry out there in the market. The New Zealand dollar is steady at 63.1 US cents. That's quite low still, but it's been tracking that most of the day. 90.6 Australian and 51.1 pence.
Thanks, Nona. Ka kite. Nona Peltier there with Business News. The government's fully opening the border from the end of July, meaning international students and tourists will be able to apply for visas to come in. A green list will attract migrants in 85 hard-to-fill roles, including highly skilled healthcare, engineers, trade and tech sector workers. About 20,000 migrants already in the country will have their visas extended. Katie Armstrong is an immigration advisor at Into New Zealand, and she joins me now. Kia ora, Katie.
Kia ora.
Any surprises in this announcement for you?
Oh, there are lots of surprises. But I mean, in a way and in a way not. It's that kind of feeling. So these were things that were rumbling under the surface as needed. But yes, there are still some surprises in there. Yeah.
Okay, so which bit stood out for you for being good or being of concern?
There's so much to wrap one's head around, but I suppose the biggest thing for me, of course, is people may associate me with Reunite Families, the movement for the families that have been split all through the border. So I want to talk about them first. What this is, I think you said it at the beginning, it is a border opening, that's what it's being referred to, but to be honest, for a lot of people, it's really not a border opening, it's just the opening of visa processing. So we have in New Zealand all these families that have been split, and we've been jumping up and down about it because it's been so terrible. And for those, today's announcement doesn't come as complete relief. It just means from 31st July they'll be able to apply for the visas for their family members, and on their lips is how long is that going to take? Because pre-COVID it could sometimes take 6 or more months to get a visa for your partner. So that is still a very, very large pain point. And, I don't want to come across as a moaner, but really, this has been going on for so long. Did we really have to wait until 31st of July just to start visa processing for those people? But anyway, if I turn to the other side...
Katie, can I just ask you about that before you move on to your next thing? What confidence do you have that Immigration New Zealand has the capacity to execute this new policy and process visas? Because the Minister today said they've taken on more staff, they're moving to more streamlined computer processes. Do you have confidence in that?
I have huge reservations about that. I think the trust is extremely low. I mean, we had been told how many times that the residence program, this new Residence 2021, would all be done within a year, and now suddenly they've got to rob Peter to pay Paul. They've got to take people off that to do this, so the capacity really isn't there, and it means they opened up a visa category in full knowledge that it was going to suck the living daylights out of the resources. So no, even with hiring staff, that means you've got new staff, mistakes get made, we see those mistakes on the ground. I'm really concerned. I would hope that split migrant families get absolute priority let's say as against maybe a tourist, but I don't see that in here.
The green list that they announced today, which is going to replace the skills shortage list, there's about 85 occupations on there. They get fast-tracked to residency. They can arrive on their work visa and basically apply straight away. Have they got the mix of occupations right, do you think?
To be frank, that needs more analysis. I'm sure, as with everything, when it comes to immigration policy, there's been a history of anomalies. And we will see things that have fallen off that list that possibly should have been on there. But it is a step in the right direction for absolute sure. It doesn't mean people will get their residency straight away. They're going to have to work on a pathway to residence. But, I guess it's just so interesting, isn't it, that this has just come so late in the piece. We already had those rules for accredited employer, and it was going to be a median wage or bust, and it was going to be twice median if you were to go to residence. I think the squeeze has been on the government to come up with a solution because it just simply was not realistic the way it was. But, the green list is welcome. I'll need more time to analyse where it may fall off the cliff.
Some of the political criticism is that this is a white immigration policy, and the Green Party in particular is asking where is the path to residency for workers that we have relied on doing low-skilled jobs. What is your thoughts on that?
I absolutely would agree with that. I think the huge missing link here is what happens to people who are onshore, who've been working all through the pandemic and sometimes for much longer than that, who, for whatever reason, didn't get into that Residence 2021, and this brings no relief to them whatsoever. So we've got a whole cohort. The other cohort that I feel, I just cannot believe how unfair we have been to them. It's those post-study work visa holders who are mostly, as it happens, from India. That's an inconvenient truth, and they got stuck. They're ones that left New Zealand just before March 2020 for whatever reason to go back, see family, whole lives here. They were on post-study visas, and what have they done? They've just said if you're onshore as a post-study work visa holder, we'll renew your visa free of charge for 2 years. If you're offshore, you get nothing, zero. That is not right.
Katie, really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. That is Katie Armstrong, who's an immigration advisor at Into NZ. Let's get to some of your feedback now. Carol has got in touch to say, I put in an online citizenship request 1 year ago, still not assigned a case officer. 1 year, Carol. Wow. Gary's got in touch to say New Zealand residents must get first priority for employment. And Christian says 28,000 new residents. Is there a BYO house policy in place, or have we got some spare ones someone forgot to mention? Now, that's an interesting point, Christian, because given that we've basically had closed borders for more than 2 years, you wonder if that logic applies, why the housing crisis hasn't rectified itself when we haven't had high immigration numbers. Shelley says nurses get immediate residency in New Zealand and higher wages. If I was a nurse looking to immigrate, I know which country I would choose. Thanks for your feedback. Do keep it coming. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. New Zealanders are being urged to avoid non-essential travel to Sri Lanka as the country's crisis deepens. The government there has ordered troops to open fire on anyone looting and deployed the armed forces to patrol the streets as anti-government protests continue. Back here, those with links to Sri Lanka are watching on nervously. Rachel Graham has more.
Athula Wanasinghe, who moved to New Zealand from Sri Lanka 25 years ago, returned from a visit to Sri Lanka on Tuesday, just as the violent clashes broke out. He says people are desperate and incredibly frustrated at government mismanagement, which has led to power cuts, strikes, shortages of almost all goods, and constant queues to get the few items available.
Milk powder being sold on the basis of teaspoons, right? So you can imagine the grocer opens up a packet and then he sells teaspoon by teaspoon to the people.
Mr. Wanasinghe travelled to Sri Lanka because his mother is unwell. Her surgery was cancelled because of the power cuts, strikes by medical workers and lack of medical supplies. In Sri Lanka, Mahinda Rajapaksa has resigned as Prime Minister, but demonstrators want his brother, the President, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, to go as well. The Information Minister, until the government collapsed, Nalaka Godhua, says Sri Lanka is in a state of mob rule.
Some groups of people were targeting the houses of government MPs, government ministers and politicians. That happened in every district, every electorate.
Sanjana Hatotowa, who has lived in New Zealand since 2018, says people want the Rajapaksa family to go.
It's a very simple thing. These are the architects of our country's cataclysmic failure. It's not hyperbole. They literally have bankrupted the country.
He says even his elderly mother would be out with the protesters if not for her dodgy knees. The president of United Sri Lanka Association, Rangeeth Nanakara, says it is an extremely worrying situation. His group held a food bazaar in Wellington last week to raise funds to help charitable groups buy medication.
At the moment, actually, people don't have, important sort of essential medicine like insulin, metformin, heart patients' drugs, blood pressure, tablets and things like that. So we thought of helping, that kind of thing,
The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Nanaia Mahuta, tweeted that Aotearoa New Zealand condemns the violence in Sri Lanka directed at peaceful protesters. She said no violence can bring Sri Lanka closer to solving its political and economic problems, and that New Zealand encouraged all to work for a peaceful, democratic and just solution. 68 New Zealanders are registered as currently being in Sri Lanka. This afternoon, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade updated its advice and now warns people to avoid any non-essential travel to Sri Lanka. It recommends that New Zealanders in Sri Lanka should avoid protests, demonstrations, rallies and large crowds, as they have the potential to turn violent with little warning.
Fancy the idea of being ferried across the Waitemata Harbour while avoiding swells and seasickness, or maybe you're just sick of sitting in traffic? Well, Austrian firm Doppelmayr is working on an alternative, looking at the feasibility of a $200 million gondola across the harbour. It says its technology can move 6,000 people an hour in each direction, with cabins arriving every 15 seconds. They say it would run from the Akoranga bus exchange on North Shore to downtown Auckland. Now, one of the people backing the idea is former Waitakere City Mayor Sir Bob Harvey, and he joins me now. Tēnā koe, Sir Bob.
Tēnā koe. That was a great introduction. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Well, it's pretty dramatic stuff, isn't it, Sir Bob? So paint us a picture. What would it look like in your mind's eye?
Well, firstly, we've got the harbour, the Waitemata, which is I think one of the great harbours in the world, actually. And we've got a good bridge. I love the bridge. I'm old enough to remember it being built. And then they turned up and said, what about the gondolas over the harbour? I thought, wow, great. Easy to do. I think easier than a tunnel, which is hugely expensive. And the harbour bridge, by the way, takes as much own traffic as it did 10 years ago. I thought this makes a lot of sense. Easy, economically marvellous, about a tenth of doing anything else. And they look good.
So it's not just a gimmick, Sir Bob?
Yeah.
It's not just a tourism gimmick, it's actually a commuter solution, do you think?
Exactly. That's what I like about it. Yes, I'm sure tourists would think it's a great idea, but I think so would people on North Shore and so would people, I guess, in this side. Because when you start building infrastructure like tunnels, you destroy communities, you destroy families. The whole thing is so massive. This one, it's kind of like a clip-on, but we're actually not going to clip it on. It'll appear, I would think, under the harbour bridge, but close to the harbour bridge from the underside. I think it's a great idea, and today has been one of those days when you really feel good about being an Aucklander. It's a great idea, a big idea that makes a lot of sense, and it's bloody fun, by the way. That's what I like about it.
Well, here's the one thing, Sir Bob, and I don't know if you are a cyclist, but the thing is, if you're riding a bike, you just want to continue on your journey, right? You want to power yourself over whatever thing is there to get you across the water. Isn't this a palaver? You ride your bike, you load it onto a gondola, a carriage, go across on a wire, get off on the other side. Don't you want something where people can just continue on their journey? Cycle down the road, cycle over a bridge or a path.
That's a good question, by the way. I think, but around the world, people put their bikes on gondolas. They do it right through South America, which has been an astonishing success. In Paris now, that we're doing that. In Amsterdam, Tel Aviv, it's just such a good solution. And that's what I like about it, that there's now world recognition by the ease. Singapore, you go into a building that, like downtown, go up in an escalator, and there is a gondola coming through that centre and taking it somewhere you want to go. So I hear you about bikes, and I think they may say, when are we getting a bike path over the bridge? Well, I guess maybe and maybe not. And that's the whole thing about Auckland's. Everything has been 10, 20 years. This one, I'm not saying you can put it up by Christmas, but you can put them up in 2 years, 3 years.
200 million, Bob. Do you actually believe that? 200 million, that sounds a bit light.
No, it sounds about right, because to be honest, they're safe and clean and beautiful design and stylish, but they're easy to do. Other things that we've done are not easy to do. Light rail is not easy to do, and the whole system in Auckland is not easy to do. These are easy to do, and it doesn't go far. The harbour isn't like 20 kilometres across. The harbour is about 2 kilometres, and we could do it quickly. No, the price is right. It's about a tenth of anything else. And so when you put those all together, it's a big tick. It really is a big tick, and that's why I think people like it. They're smart. They get it.
Pleasure to talk to you, Sir Bob. Thank you for joining us. That's Sir Bob Harvey, who's backing this idea of a gondola across the Waitemata Harbour. Let us know your thoughts. You can text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Aotearoa's average house price may be dipping, but in some corners of the country, the climb continues. The Quotable Value House Index out this week showed a 2% drop in the 3 months to May. Northland was one of the 4 regions that kept up positive growth, alongside Canterbury, Taranaki and Queenstown Lakes. Sam Ollie reports.
The dream of buying a home in Te Tai Tokiro is a bridge too far for this woman.
It was a possibility for a little while that could happen, but now there's just nothing. I couldn't even afford to buy a piece of land to stick a caravan on now.
And with rental prices at all-time highs, she had to opt for a property 15 minutes out of town in Dargaville.
I could not afford to go and rent in town. There's no way I could afford to do that and feed us.
QV says Northland's rapid growth in house prices appears to be defying convention, up 3% over February, March and April. Spokesman Simon Peterson says prices have been historically lower than the national average and people are making the move north.
Auckland is looking for a change in lifestyle, so that's going to keep pressure on housing.
Rachel Rowland and her husband have been looking to buy in Kaipara. Just above Auckland, it is the most expensive district in Northland. Values have grown 28% in the past year to just under $950,000 on average.
Am I going to be renting till the cows come home now? Possibly, especially if the houses keep going up. We just can't afford one.
She has 3 children, 2 with disabilities, and they need wheelchair access.
Maybe another 10 years, if I save like crazy to get even more of a deposit to afford the house that's suitable for our family, are they going to be skyrocket by then again? Even then we can't afford it.
Ivan Rauch is also saving for a house deposit in Te Tai Tokero.
We need to get 10%. It's a lot harder for us to get it as the house market is climbing. So it's a case of we're pretty much just chasing our tail at the moment.
Those unable to buy or rent are increasingly looking for state housing from Kāinga Ora. But the Northland waitlist is now 6 times what it was 5 years ago, growing from just under 250 applications in March 2017 to just under 1,500 this March. Regional Director Jeff Murray says Kāinga Ora's building 140 new homes by the middle of next year, the biggest building program in decades. But he acknowledges the list won't disappear.
We'll build the homes that we can build within the budget that we've been given, and that won't tackle the wait list.
Nationally, the average house price is still more than $1 million. QV estimated $1,040,000 this week.
The gilts may be wearing a bit thin on Wellington's Golden Mile with the news that the glitzy David Jones department store will be replaced by an assortment of smaller shops. Some in the retail sector and at least one councillor are blaming the council for not doing enough to save inner city businesses. Ruth Hill reports.
There's been a department store on this Lambton Quay site for nearly 160 years. But next month David Jones will close its plate glass doors in the capital. It's sad news for some.
Tragic. It's always tragic when you get something on the main street that has to close, that hasn't been able to survive.
I'm really sorry about it. I hate to see a space like that empty.
Oh, it's terrible. Well, that's what Wellington was all about, these wonderful department stores.
Others are more ambivalent.
It's not a great store. There's too many staff or something. It's just not very relaxing being there. I don't care if it stays or goes, really. I've just got a voucher, so that's why I'm going.
The building's an icon, but an Australian-run company, you know, they weren't in for the long haul.
Robert Jones Midland, which owns the building, has not confirmed reports it's in discussions with several Australian retailers over taking over the ground floor lease, with smaller outlets on the second floor and the top floor turned into offices. Wellington Chamber of Commerce head Simon Arcus says retail is evolving.
If it's a grouping of high-quality retailers that attracts people and foot traffic back into the city, we're all for it. Obviously, once upon a time, department stores started out this way. They were, of course, a conglomerate of smaller businesses that got together and attracted people to them because they were convenient. So let's hope that's the direction we're going in.
Mr Arcus says Wellington is starting to see increased foot traffic and there's more optimism, but the recovery remains fragile. Retail New Zealand is less upbeat. Its spokesperson Amy Hines says it's worrying that the capital city can't sustain a high-end department store. She says the Let's Get Wellington Moving plan to make the Golden Mile buses only will be the death knell for some decades-old businesses.
Wellington City Council has consistently taken Wellingtonians a little bit for a ride, increased prices, increased the time that parking has to be charged, and that's just not made it viable, whether it's for retailers or even hospitality or even the theatre and arts perspective, where people are getting charged parking all the way into 8 p.m. at night in Wellington now.
Pukahino Lambton Ward Councillor Nicola Young also believes the Let's Get Wellington Moving plan is misguided.
I don't have a magic solution, but I just think the council is trying to make things more difficult for a sector that is really under stress.
That aside, Nicola Young says unlike its predecessor, the venerable Kercordian Staines, David Jones never really captured the Wellington market.
I'd go in there and think these handbags are, Alexander McQueen handbags and Stella McCartney for $3,000. The people in Wellington who buy those, the very few, probably go abroad anyway and will buy them overseas.
Mayor Andy Foster says the council has cut parking fees to just $1 an hour in the early evening and weekends until the end of June. He concedes parking could be an issue with the Let's Get Wellington Moving plan as it stands.
Personally, I think that is an issue, and I think we've got to work through that very carefully with our retail community. And I would really, really encourage people to get involved in the detailed design process which is being run through Let's Get Wellington Moving at the moment, because I would like to see some willingness to be flexible.
Meanwhile, Wellingtonians are eagerly waiting to see what will replace David Jones and whether it will restore the Govt to the Golden Mile.
As long as it stays retail and preferably not banks, maybe not cafes. We might have enough of them, but any form of retail, yeah.
Something that's going to draw people. Nothing worse than coming to a city with an empty space like that.
David Jones will shut on the 12th of June.
Let's get to some of your feedback now on Foodstuffs. It's cutting prices on about 110 items that it says are everyday items. One listener says, I looked up the cost of mainland tasty cheese today. It's half the cost in Australia. Another listener says, Gardens New World in Dunedin are charging, a brace for it, $21.49 for a kilo of mainland tasty cheese. Has it got gold plating? One wonders. And someone else says, how much have supermarket workers' wages gone up in the last year? And this listener says, listening to Chris Quinn, who's the boss of Foodstuffs, re-grocery discounts, you have to laugh. A month ago, he claimed they were already as cheap as possible, yet now they have found some margins to use. My bet is they have screwed their suppliers to enable them to offer discounts. You can bet it won't hit their bottom lines. Well, he reckon it will.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. The Immigration Minister, Chris Farfoy, says his ministry is ready to process an influx of applications when the border reopens. New Zealand will fully open to the world at the end of July, with sector-specific settings to shift away from low-skilled migrant labour. Chris Farfoy told Checkpoint Immigration New Zealand has hired 230 more staff and moved the application system online in preparation.
That will help us with the user experience, but also help us manage the workflows behind the scenes to ensure all the likes of visitor visas, work visas, student visas, and importantly making sure that we can get the resident visas that have been applied for done in a timely manner.
Chris Farfoy says the new online system will mean people can track their application's progress online instead of ringing the 0800 number. Foodstuffs says a price cut could lead to some groceries costing the same as a year ago. From next Monday, New World's Pack and Save and Foursquare supermarkets are cutting the prices of more than 110 of the most shopped items. This comes just days after competitor Woolworths said it would freeze prices on more than 500 essential items. Foodstuffs North Island boss Chris Quinn has told Checkpoint he thinks the initiative will save customers a total of about $500,000 a week. That must be obviously in total. He says discounted items will include butter, cheese, flour and some fresh produce. The head of Charity Services says an organisation deregistered as a charity stands to be hit in the pocket as it loses tax and other benefits. The charities regulator has opened an investigation into Gloriavale's Christian Church Community Trust after the Employment Court found the community was employing children as young as 6. Judge Christina Ingalls found that 3 former members of the community carried out strenuous, difficult and sometimes dangerous duties. The General Manager of Charity Services, Mike Stone, told Checkpoint the court's decision raised concerns about Gloriavale, but he says it's too soon to determine the scope of the investigation or how long it will take. Police have charged 2 15-year-olds in relation to a ram raid at Ormiston Shopping Centre in Auckland last month. 2 others were arrested as multiple warrants were executed in Auckland and Northland. John T. Dine reports.
4 people have been arrested, 3 of them under the age of 18. Another man, aged 22, has been summoned to appear in the Manukau District Court. Counties Manukau Detective Inspector Karen Bright says the 3rd young person was referred to Youth Aid. The 2 15-year-olds will appear separately in the Manukau and Whangarei Youth Courts. 3 stolen cars were used to ram raid the shopping centre in the suburb of Flatbush on April 26, and electronic goods and clothes were stolen.
The PR company representing celebrity Nadia Lim says the apology made by businessman Simon Henry adds further insult to injury. Deborah Peed says Ms Lim received an emailed apology yesterday evening after the chief executive of chemical company DGL made derogatory comments on her appearance 6 days earlier. The two-line letter states Mr Henry hopes Ms Lim will accept the letter as his sincere and formal apology for his inappropriate language. Ms Peed says in her opinion one had to wonder why he even bothered. Northland's stubborn house prices are frustrating aspiring buyers. The quotable value house index out this week showed a 2% drop in the national average house price in the 3 months to May, but Northland was one of 4 regions that kept up positive growth, alongside Canterbury, Taranaki and Queenstown Lakes. Rachel Rowland and her husband have been looking to buy in Kaipara in Te Tai Tokiro, but house values there have grown 28% in the past year.
Am I going to be renting till the cows come home now? Possibly, especially if the houses keep going up. We just can't afford one.
Rachel Rowland says the constantly climbing prices are very upsetting. And the Wellington Mayor, Andy Foster, says demand is high for retail space in the capital, despite the loss of its biggest department store. He's confident the Australian-owned David Jones won't leave a gap when it closes next month. However, Mr Foster concedes the Let's Get Wellington Moving plan may need refining to allay retailers' fears over the loss of car parks.
Personally, I think that is an issue, and I think we've got to work through that very carefully with our retail community. And I would really, really encourage people to get involved in the detailed design process which is being run through Let's Get Wellington Moving at the moment, because I would like to see some willingness to be flexible.
Andy Foster says Wellington needs more people walking, cycling and using public transport, but the council understands that many will still need their cars to shop. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Rihanna Reese on the science of seaweed and how we can use it. Sound historian Sarah Johnston celebrates the work of the Mobile Broadcasting Unit, which followed New Zealand troops during the Second World War. And this week's Hump Prize is He Reo no Ngā Pakanga o Aotearoa, Voices from the New Zealand Wars by Vincent O'Malley. Does history repeat? Find out for yourself before you go to sleep. It's me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint with Lisa Owen next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. From Northland to Waitomo, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taumarunui and Taupo, fine weather. From Taranaki to Wellington, including Taihape and Wairarapa, partly cloudy, becoming fine apart from Wairarapa tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers in Gisborne and northern Hawke's Bay, but areas of cloud elsewhere. Nelson, Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, mostly fine. There is a chance of a shower about Bulla and northwest Nelson today, also for the far south of Fiordland. Fine weather for Marlborough and Canterbury. Otago and Southland, fine. Clouds developing this evening, becoming mainly fine tomorrow afternoon. And for the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with the odd shower. It's 6 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Ngā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Businesses are relieved the border will fully open on July 31st, 2 months earlier than signalled. The date was revealed as part of the government's immigration reset that's aimed at building a high-skill, high-wage economy. Amy Williams was at the announcement.
It's the news businesses have been waiting for.
I can announce that New Zealand fully reopens to the world by July 31. Completing our reconnecting work 2 months ahead of schedule.
The announcement came with a swathe of immigration updates to pave the return of highly skilled workers and shift away from low-paid migrant workers. NZ Wine Growers Chief Executive Phil Gregan says reopening the border to holidaymakers and tourists is important.
First, it's a big signal, a positive signal that we're open for business. I think it's also going to have clearly very positive impacts on tourism, on hospitality and our business, on winery cellar doors, hopefully.
The wine sector is reliant on seasonal workers.
Opening the border is one thing, getting the people to come here is another. There is going to be, I think, nervousness with a lot of long-haul travel, and we'll just have to see how the working holiday visa numbers actually play out.
Businesses have been calling for the border to completely reopen for some time. Business New Zealand's Director of Advocacy, Catherine Beard, says skills shortages are across the board.
One of the top headaches that we hear constantly from every sector is a shortage of talent. So we really need to throw the welcome mat open to immigrants. We're competing with other countries for this talent and it's really hurting.
The meat sector is the country's largest manufacturing employer, keeping 25,000 people in work. Meat Industry Association Chief Executive Surma Karapiva says the sector needs migrant workers.
The wider opening of the border, bringing it forward and allowing a wider skill set to come in will certainly be a positive move.
The meat industry is one of the sectors that'll transition from relying on low-wage, low-skill migrant labour by this time next year.
We are struggling with a sustained and ongoing skills shortage and worker shortage. We are approximately 2,000 people short right across the board in all sorts of different roles and skills levels.
The skills shortage is top of mind among business leaders. Salesforce Managing Director for New Zealand, Hamish Miles, says the digital skills gap is growing.
I speak to senior execs pretty much every day. We talk about two things. We talk about skills shortage and we talk about getting back to growth mode for their businesses. So this announcement today will be well received by the tech industry.
He says the sector needs to attract skilled Kiwi workers back from overseas.
Getting highly skilled migrants into the country will be important. I think that the pandemic really highlighted the fact when the border shut that we didn't have enough people coming through the tech industry. So locally we've invested a significant amount of resources into training another 500 people this year and another 1,000 next year.
With many businesses clamouring to attract skilled workers, immigration could have an avalanche of visa applications.
And the Green Party has come out swinging against the border announcement, saying it amounts to white immigration policy. It says the new settings will disproportionately affect migrants from non-Western countries, entrenching a two-tier immigration system. Our political reporter, Annika Smith, has more.
T-minus 2 months out from the border reopening and politicians of all stripes are far from happy. Come the end of July, the border will fully open with tailored immigration settings. Among them, a green list to attract migrants in 85 hard-to-fill roles, such as high-skilled healthcare, engineers, trade and tech sector workers. The Green Party's immigration spokesperson, Ricardo Menendez-March, says it amounts to white immigration policy.
I think when we contextualize that many of the students and workers on low wages are from India and the Philippines, it kind of feels like we are creating a white immigration policy, whether intentionally or otherwise.
Mr Menendez-March argues the new settings undermine the work of many migrant workers who've held essential jobs during the pandemic.
The worth of one's labour is determined by one's salary, and this is wrong. Migrants deserve genuine pathways to residency and the certainty that they'll be able to put down roots in the community after spending significant amount of time working in very essential industries here.
The new immigration settings streamline the residency pathway for migrants either in green list occupations or paid twice the median wage. National's immigration spokesperson Erica Stanford says this broad brush approach is just lazy.
They could be far more nuanced and actually have fair wage rates per industry, per region, but instead they're taking the easy route, a broad brush approach, and I think it's based on an unfair assumption that migrant workers drive down wages, which, by the way, the Productivity Commission said actually doesn't happen.
ACT Party leader David Seymour says the border should be open right now, and families have been separated for far too long.
It's not opening the border in July, it's opening applications in July. Immigration New Zealand says that it will be 5 months on average to process a visa. The reality is if you're one of the 14% of New Zealanders born in a non-visa waiver country, then your non-resident family can't visit this year.
Immigration Minister Chris Farfoy says New Zealand can't return to pre-pandemic trends that saw an over-reliance on lower-skilled workers. He says the government has worked closely with businesses on the immigration reforms and understands some sectors will take longer to transition away from cheap migrant labour.
It is 12 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A few of you getting in touch about the immigration reset, particularly about the nurses being on the second tier of the green list, which is the sought-after occupations. They'll have to wait 2 years after arriving here to apply for residency. Doctors can apply basically as soon as they get here. This listener says there's no incentive for nurses to choose New Zealand as a place to work when they can go anywhere else to be better paid, better valued and get residency. It's just as simple as that. Another says the minister's justification that we want nurses to stay with one employer for 2 years does not hold water. Why is it not the same for doctors? Just makes no sense. And this one, nurses, we're always second and less valued. Nurses are so poorly valued in New Zealand. It's really appalling and very sad. Thank you for your feedback. Stewart Island's visitor levy is expected to treble, but it'll be phased in. The $5 levy has been in place since 2013 and was aimed at easing the burden of tourism on the community. But figures from the Southland District Council suggest it will fall significantly short of covering forecast costs, prompting councillors to vote for a levy increase. Tess Brunton has more.
For the Southland District Council, today's vote has been a long time coming. They first started suggesting trebling the levy back in 2018. Stewart Island Rakiora Ward councillor Bruce Ford says the community was concerned if the levy rose to $15, it would scare off visitors.
The community is genuinely concerned. Whilst we've been busy recently, we're not sure how long that's going to go, and we've been very lucky in that respect, and the numbers have held pretty good. But I would be concerned myself personally that we will lose some numbers as the borders open.
Councillor Margie Ruddenclaw didn't agree.
Don't undersell that place, it's stunning. I think the visitor levy fee, the increase, and only looking at it 5 yearly, and we're looking $10 or $15 around the table today. I think neither of them are excessive.
Councillor Christine Menzies suggested an amendment increasing the levy to $10 next October, with the levy increasing to $15 in October 2025.
If it's left at 6 years, I'd be pretty uncomfortable if we vote for $10 today, given the paper which initially indicated that with the assessment of the projects, and I know there's some debate around that, would be up to $30. So we would be covering the full cost with $15.
The phased approach received full support, but it won't be formally passed until next month. Over on Rakiora, Olva Goodwillie from Olva's Guided Walks is concerned about the impact on transport companies who add the levy onto their fares.
People don't really notice a $5, but when they increase it another $10, it doesn't allow our transport companies to put their own cost of living increase. It's a very big jump when people look at the fare coming to Stewart Island, and then they're going to put a $10 increase on top of that, and then a few years later a $15 increase on top of that.
Aaron Joy from Stewart Island Backpackers believes the council always planned to push the increase through. He wants to know exactly where the funds are going.
If you start putting money from the visitor levy, which they will do, into other projects, then I'm sorry, this is where we as residents will draw a line.
He wants more community consultation before the levy is hiked to $15.
Will it affect the visitors coming here? If it does, then I guarantee a few accommodation providers, we start sending an account to the council for loss of income. We don't know, but that's an option.
The Stewart Island Visitor Levy will be back on the council's agenda next month, when it's expected to be given a rubber stamp of approval.
World Rugby is having another crack at establishing a new North versus South global competition. It's being touted as the most significant restructure of the game since the advent of professionalism in the 1990s. The Nations Championship would see the All Blacks playing in a Southern Hemisphere top division that would play crossover games against the Six Nations teams. Sports reporter Felicity Reid has more.
The new competition would reportedly start in 2026, assuming any issues can be ironed out in Dublin this week and it passes a formal vote by World Rugby in November. Both the Times and Guardian are reporting the new competition would see Fiji and Japan join the All Blacks, Australia, South Africa and Argentina in the Southern Hemisphere top division. There would also be relegation and promotion in both divisions. The competition would supposedly boost the game's revenue by 40%, although the commercial split between nations remains a sticking point. There have been numerous attempts to previously get such a competition up and running, the latest being in 2019, but it floundered amid concerns over player welfare. New Zealand Rugby has so far declined to comment on the proposal, but Crusaders coach and former All Black Scott Robertson is enthusiastic.
I think it's important we get aligned now. I think this is a great chance to do it. If every sort of test match has got purpose and it's leading to an outcome, it just makes sense, doesn't it? And then we can get everything aligned, and then it means we can align World Club champs in there as well. So that, we've got a club championship and an international championship, and in a cycle of all 4 years. So for me, let's do it.
All Black hooker Cody Taylor is also keen on the nation's championship.
You're seeing those Northern Hemisphere teams really step up a level, and the rugby's actually going pretty good up there. So you almost feel a little bit isolated in terms of where we are at as a competition, so it'd be cool to challenge yourself against those teams.
Taylor would also like to see an international club competition established that would see the top Super Rugby Pacific sides take on the best of Europe.
I can understand the balance between player welfare and aligning the seasons and stuff, but I watch that Northern stuff quite closely now and around what they're doing, and it's awesome to see. And I think there was a 70,000 people crowd at one of the French games not too long ago, which is pretty crazy. It's just a whole nother level, everything. So be a cool opportunity.
Rugby commentator Scotty Stevenson still sees problems for Pacific Island teams developing their game should a Nations Championship get the green light. Any finals or promotion relegation games would likely fall outside the international window, which would leave the smaller nations struggling to field their best sides.
The French clubs in particular, not to mention the Japanese clubs and some of the British clubs, they have a lot of Pacific Island representation in their number, and they could well sit there and say, no, we're not going to release you for this game. And where does that then leave those Pacific teams? So there's still a number of details to work through here.
Both the Six Nations and Rugby Championship will remain unaffected, removing the thorny issue of promotion and relegation being introduced to the European competition involving England, Ireland, Wales, France, Scotland and Italy.
Sri Lankan security forces have been ordered to shoot looters or lawbreakers. MPs' homes are being burned and there is a nationwide curfew. The country is experiencing its worst economic crisis since independence. There are food shortages, soaring prices and power cuts. The Prime Minister's resigned, but now protesters want the President to go as well. The BBC's Rajni Vaidyanathan reports.
A capital under curfew. Troops told to shoot at sight at anyone who damages public property or threatens lives. The skeletons of a bustling city, scorched by an economic crisis, reeling after a day of violence. Yesterday, supporters of the Prime Minister attacked anti-government protesters, who until that point had been peacefully demonstrating. At the city's main hospital, more than 200 of the wounded. Many were beaten up. This man fractured his leg after a tear gas canister landed on it. War veterans Ujit and Asanka are out of hospital. Men who lost their legs in mines during Sri Lanka's civil war say they were beaten up by the very people they made sacrifices for. They started punching me. I was left with only one crutch. They pushed me and I fell, Ujit said. When we served in the army, people used to pray for us. Now we're being attacked, Asanka said. With trust in the government shattered, the homes of at least 24 politicians who back the ruling party have been torched. This was one of the houses that was vandalised last night. It belonged to a supporter of the government, a local mayor, and this was the bedroom. It was set on fire. All you can see now is the metal that forms the coils of the mattress. And if we just move into the living room, completely trashed. Just look around. Tonight, a resort belonging to the son of Sri Lanka's former Prime Minister, Mahinda Rajapaksa, who quit yesterday, was set alight. And clashes broke out in the city of Negombo. Protesters want the president, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, to resign. As long as he stays, tensions on this island will be inflamed.
The Queen's speech, which sets out the British government's agenda for the year ahead, is one of the greatest events of state. But for the first time in almost 60 years, Queen Elizabeth was not there. The monarch authorised the Prince of Wales and the Duke of Cambridge to open the new parliamentary session on her behalf. Buckingham Palace says the Queen's been suffering from mobility issues. The BBC's Nicholas Witchell looks at the significance.
He's been waiting for his destiny for longer than any other heir to the British throne. And while no one is suggesting that a major change is imminent, the inescapable fact is that a transition is underway. And this, today, was the most tangible sign of it. As Prince Charles took his place on the consort's throne, the imperial state crown, the symbol of the monarch's authority, was placed on a table beside him. The Prince studied it closely, and then, with Lords and Commons assembled, a Prince who's never been short of his own opinions took on the discipline required of a monarch, reading out the words written by the government.
The continued success and integrity of the whole of the United Kingdom is of paramount importance to Her Majesty's government.
It was this, the Regency Act of 1937, that the palace used to delegate the power to open Parliament. Yet nobody's suggesting a permanent transfer of the monarch's powers. The Queen is still busy with her paperwork and virtual audiences. Changes are happening, but they're gradual.
For the Queen, it's always been very important to carry out all her public duties in public whenever she can. She has famously said, to be seen is to be believed. And she believes the monarchy must be seen, but in future it's likely that what we're going to see is other members of the royal family carrying out royal duties on her behalf.
For 7 decades, Britain has had a highly visible head of state. Those days are over. Realities are having to be faced. The burden is shifting.
And to Australia now, where in almost every part of the country finding a place to rent is difficult. And for many families, getting an affordable rental is almost impossible. In the Queensland city of Bundaberg, the shortage is so bad that even people with stable jobs are living in cars or tents. The ABC's John Daly reports.
Dinosaurs, guys.
And what's your favourite dinosaur, do you reckon?
On his bedroom floor, 4-year-old Caden is showing off his dinosaur collection.
Is that off Jurassic Park?
Yeah.
But he'll soon have to pack up his toys. His family's rental home is being sold, and his mum, Taylor Dipple, hasn't found anywhere else to live.
We just can't find one. There's just not enough places and too many people. My partner's got a full-time job. He's making decent money and we can afford it, but there's, just not enough places.
Where are you going to go?
In a tent, unfortunately, and all the caravan parks are booked out, so it's looking like either we go out camping in the bush, and usually that's only a week stay, or in the 24-hour rest stops.
She says each rental has hundreds of applicants, and with a 7-month-old and another baby on the way, she's worried.
It's winter, it's freezing, it's raining all the time at the moment. They're tiny, and you don't want them being out in the cold. You don't want to see your kids in a tent. And, by the looks of it, I'll be having the newborn in the tent with us as well.
At the Angels Community Group Support Centre in Bundaberg, I meet Christy, who's got a job, but is still sleeping in a tent.
Absolute joke. You try and go for a rental and there's 300 applications. Working full-time, so money's not a problem, but I'm still resorted to living in a tent at a friggin' scout hall.
Yeah. The rental vacancy in Bundaberg is 0.4%, the lowest in a decade. The city sits in the safe LNP-held electorate of Hinkler, which also includes Childers and Harvey Bay.
And what else is your basic stuff in there?
Angels Community Group CEO Sue Tasker says homelessness and housing are big problems throughout the region.
It's terrible. We see it every day. And it's working people. It's not just your typical what you imagine is a homeless person. They're either couch surfing or they're actually living on the streets. They're living in their cars.
Two footballers' wives leaked stories to the tabloids and elaborate Instagram sting. It's the scandal dubbed Wagatha Christie between the wives of two former England footballers. Rebecca Vardy is accusing Colleen Rooney of defamation after Rooney singled her out for leaking stories about her to the British tabloids. Now the stage has been set and the battle's playing out in a London courtroom. The BBC's Colin Patterson has the details.
Colleen Rooney arriving at the High Courts accompanied by her husband Wayne Rooney for the start of a much anticipated trial, which her legal team have summed up as being about betrayal. 1 minute later, Rebecca Vardy, who was suing her for libel, strode in. Both women very used to cameras, but not the courtroom. Inside, Colleen Rooney sat next to her husband at one end of the front bench. No more than 10 feet away was Rebecca Vardy. There was almost zero eye contact between the two former friends. At the 2016 Euros, they had cheered on England together from the stands, but everything changed in October 2019 when Colleen Rooney did some online detective work to investigate who was leaking information about her to the press. She wrote 3 fictitious tales on her private Instagram stories, including ones about returning to TV and their basement flooding, to see if they would end up in the sun, and they did. Only then did Colleen reveal, after the use of 10 dots to ramp up the tension, that the one account she'd allowed access to read them was Rebecca Vardy's. In court today, we heard the details of Rebecca Vardy's case, that she'd been left with no choice but to bring this libel claim to establish her innocence and validate her reputation. It was stressed that this legal battle was being reported as entertainment, but in fact had had a hugely damaging impact on Rebecca Vardy's life.
And then it was the turn of Colleen Rooney's legal team to set out her case. They claimed that Rebecca Vardy's agent had leaked the stories, and this was like hiring a hitman. Although Rebecca Vardy hadn't pulled the trigger, she was still responsible. They also accused Rebecca Vardy's team of widespread and significant loss of evidence, including a phone being dropped into the North Sea.
Towards the end of the day, Rebecca Vardy was questioned and denied being the leak before being accused of having a history of selling stories to newspapers for money. The trial may have kicked off, but there's a long way to go, with Wayne Rooney himself expected to be called as a witness next week.
That's all we've got time for. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi o Pōpō, and tomorrow from 5 a.m, a week out from the budget, First Up speaks to people about their biggest concerns, petrol prices and the rising cost of feeding the family.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. The Immigration Minister, Chris Whāwhoi, says his ministry has hired